So I'm going to be creating a mini version of the art that I normally make. I'm going to be using wood, I'm going to be using paint of course, I'm going to be using foam which I haven't used before, and I'm even going to be using epoxy. I just need to figure out how to do it because I've never worked with pieces this small. Some of the pieces are going to be as small as a watermelon seed. So my mom's birthday was coming up. I had less than a week to get this project done, and I hadn't even started yet. My idea was to make a small version of my normal art and give that to her for her birthday. The reason it needed to be small was because she lives in Utah. I live in Florida, so I gotta be able to ship it to her without it being a crazy price. The art I normally do is quite large, and I do it large on purpose because I want to be able to include all the little details, but I don't want the details to be so small that I can't cut them out with a jigsaw. If it's smaller than 2 inches by 2 inches, it's really hard to cut with a jigsaw. So because the piece needed to be smaller, I ended up ordering a thin piece of wood, thinking that I could cut it out with an X-Acto knife. The wood I ordered said it was soft, said it could be cut out with an X-Acto knife. So I designed up this design of lavender, like a lavender flower, if that's what you call it, I'm not sure, but lavender. And I used a projector to project my design onto these pieces of wood that I bought and traced it all out, got all my pieces drawn out onto my wood. And as I started cutting, I realized there was no way I was going to be able to use this wood. I started cutting it with the X-Acto knife and it just took me 30 minutes to cut out 2 tiny pieces. So I probably could have done it, but it just would have sucked. It would have taken forever. So back to the drawing board, I spent a whole day just thinking about what I should use instead, and I remembered a comment that I had on one of my videos, and they said that they did similar style of art, but they used foam board instead of wood, and I thought that was interesting. And I ordered some, it was cheap, so I ordered some on Amazon, and just to see if I could cut it with an X-Acto knife and if the edges were good enough. I was worried that the epoxy would melt it because epoxy gets hot. I'm not sure if it gets hot enough to melt foam. So that was a concern I had about using the foam. And then also the edges on the foam just are very porous. Foam, of course, it's gonna have rough edges. So that was another big concern because you can't really sand down the foam either to make it smooth without just ripping it up. So it was just this cheap 1/8 inch foam I got from Amazon, and I got my shapes drawn out onto my foam sheets. But even with the foam boards, I could tell my design wasn't gonna work the way I wanted it to. If it was a bigger piece, the design would have been awesome. It would have been really cool. But being this smaller scale, it would have been impossible to paint it. The epoxy probably wouldn't have gone into all the little grooves. I just had all the pieces way too close together. Even though that was what was going through my head, I decided to cut out the first layer anyway, just to, see if I could make it work. So I cut it out with my X-Acto knife. The X-Acto knife was doing good. It took longer than I thought still, even with the foam, but got it going. I eventually got the first layer cut out, and I started cutting out the second layer. The second layer, I just knew it wasn't gonna work. It confirmed everything. This design was not gonna work the way I wanted it to. So I ended up going a bit rogue, just cutting out pieces that I think would look good and stack well together. By the end of cutting it out, I was just grabbing blank pieces of foam and just cutting out shapes I thought would stack well and just kind of going with the flow, coming up with it as I went. I normally don't do this, but I even began just gluing it as I went because I didn't want to lose my pieces and forget where they were gonna go. So I would cut it out, glue it, cut it out, glue it, just kind of like sculpting it almost. I ended up only doing 3 layers because even 3 layers seemed a bit thick for this piece. eventually I got to the point where I was satisfied with the result. So I took it out to the garage and I primed everything. I sprayed it with 2 coats of primer, thinking and hoping that the primer would seal those porous edges and just make it overall easier to paint. I didn't know if it was going to work, but you know, I couldn't come up with anything else to seal those edges, so that's what I came up with. So now the primer was dry, it was time to paint. I knew painting this piece was going to be a bit tricky just because the pieces were so small, very detailed, and if you know me, detailed oriented paintings are just not my strong suit. I'm not a good detailed painter. I'm more a creative mind with enough craftiness to, you know, put something together and make it look decent. And this piece was just complete detailed painting. Like, that's all it was. It was just tiny little details. Even the flat layers of one color would have to be detailed because I just have to get into all the little grooves and stuff. But my mindset was everything's fixable, so we'll just give it a try, start painting it. We can just reprime it if we need to and start over. So I got my paint. I ended up getting 2 shades of lilac, and one of them being my lightest shade, one of them being my darkest shade, and then I would mix the 2 together to be my 2 middle shades. I normally second guess the color choices I do in each piece I do, just because the colors kind of make everything. I don't really like bright colors. I kind of like them muted, and then maybe the little accents being a bit bright. But surprisingly, I actually really enjoyed painting this piece. I felt like I had a lot of creative freedom because I kind of just stopped worrying about my original design and just painted what I thought would look cool. I got to decide in the moment where my highlights were going to be, where my light source was, how the stem and the leaves were lit, and overall I had fun. I ended up mixing a bit of green with my lilac to give it a more muted look, and I really liked how that turned out. When I bought the paint, I actually bought this like skinny paintbrush, and it had like a long, I don't know what you call it, like the little hairs. It was like really long, and that really helped me out because it keeps your line a lot more steady. You don't have to worry about your hand shaking because you can just guide it along, and it makes everything a lot more smooth. And that paintbrush is really what kind of changed the game for me because it just made everything so much easier. And that paintbrush may have ignited a love for detailed painting that I didn't know I had. Maybe I was just using the wrong tools. But overall, the painting went good. I had fun. The colors turned out really good, and I thought they would look really good with the background I was gonna do. And I think that the stain color that I'm gonna do is gonna complement that lavender color really well. So all right, time for the background. I need to get started on the background. And if you know me, you know I like using a stained wood for my background. It tends to complement the piece really nicely without being like a blank, boring background. But it has like a wood grain, you can do a fun stain color. And I don't know, it just draws your eye towards the main subject a bit more than if it was a busy background. So that's kind of why I do it. I decided to use the wood that I used in my Temu video. So it's like a 16 by 16 1/4-inch piece of basswood, I believe. It was kind of the perfect size. I didn't even have to cut it or anything. So that's what I went with. And I ended up staining it the color maple. That's what I do on pretty much all of my projects that have a wood background. I feel like the color of the maple stain just really accents all the colors really nicely, pretty much no matter what color you use. So of course I used it on this piece, especially because it was gonna just accent that lavender color perfectly. But because those pieces of wood are so thin, I had to build a structure to like mount it to, because I was worried about the epoxy warping that wood, or I was worried about it getting damaged while it was being shipped. So I wanted to be a bit stronger, a bit thicker. So I made this little structure that I could glue it to, but I actually ended up making it a bit too thick. So for the frame of it, I've been getting these L-shaped like PVC pieces. They're normally used for like the edging on the exterior of homes, I believe. But I've been using that for frames on stuff. I use that for framing the art that I sell on my shop. That's what I use for this one. You just cut it out and then you can drop the piece right into it and then do your epoxy. And usually how I do it, you drop your piece in and do epoxy, and it kind of seals the whole thing together because it fills that frame 1/8 of an inch of epoxy over everything. But because this one was too thick, it was completely flush with the outside of that frame. So I was pretty worried about how I was gonna figure out how to do that epoxy. But the way it was, the epoxy was gonna end up just flowing right over the edge, over the frame, which I wasn't sure if that was gonna look good or not, because you know, epoxy's kind of unpredictable. All right, so it was time for epoxy. The epoxy part of all my projects is where it has a high chance of getting ruined. If you mix the wrong ratio, the whole piece is ruined. If you do the pour and then while it's curing, bugs get in it or dust gets in it, the whole piece is ruined. If you mix too much, it makes a huge mess everywhere and it's impossible to clean up epoxy. But on the other hand, epoxy is where the whole piece really comes together. It gives it like a nice gloss over everything, makes everything look so smooth. That's like the whole reason why I do this art, is because the epoxy makes the layers look so good when they get hit with the light. So without the epoxy, I probably wouldn't even do this style of art. So while it's the hardest part, it is the most rewarding part. So I just ordered this new epoxy. I've used it once before in the past and I really liked it. So I ordered it again. It's expensive. It was $100 for these 2 jugs. It's called Super Clear. It's like a non-toxic, food safe. Not that I need it to be food safe, but it's a non-toxic, food safe epoxy. In my experience, it levels out really nicely. It's easy to get the bubbles out and it always just finishes so smooth. It's also a lot easier to manage while it's drying. I'm not sure why, but the way it cures, it's easy to catch those drips and stuff while it's curing. But my solution for the frame and the art being flush is I ended up just letting the epoxy overflow over the edges and just making the whole thing really smooth and glossy, because you know, what else am I gonna do? I couldn't figure out any other solution, so that's what I did. I ended up doing 2 coats of epoxy, which has kind of become my normal recently. It helps solve that surface tension problem I've been having where the epoxy stays a centimeter from all my edges. I let it do that on the first coat, and then on the second coat, kind of just fills everything in, makes everything really smooth. So 2 coats is definitely the way to do it. I wasn't sure if the epoxy was just gonna fill in all those grooves because all the pieces were so small, and it was just gonna stay like a chunk. But it ended up looking really cool. It ended up being able to flow out of all those little grooves. My original design definitely wouldn't have worked with the epoxy, but the way I did it now, it worked really good. It made that lavender look really cool, really glossy. It smoothed out all those edges because, you know, those foam edges were a bit rough. I was really happy with how this one came out. After the epoxy cured, I ended up sanding down the frame, sealed it with some polyurethane, sealed the back with some polyurethane, attached the hardware that was needed to be able to hang the piece. Once I did that, it was ready to send to Utah. As of filming this, I just shipped it out to her to Utah, so I hope she likes it, and I guess that means now it's time to show you guys.